Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI, from author David Grann. And so I started listening to audiobooks. I have Audible now, and decided that I'm hoping that this could be a way to really re-spark me getting through books. I know it's technically not reading anymore, but it's still the book. It's just being read out loud. And this particular nonfiction story is absolutely fascinating, and a story that's untold and left in the past until Grann dug this all up with some impeccable research and so many layers in how this whole situation was handled. This story is coming to the big screen thanks to Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio. It's one of those kinds of things where you sit and you read or listen to this story and are just pissed off because how horrific this all was. This manipulative game of marrying native women to steal their fortunes because they had this land, they had this oil, it was theirs, it was their wealth. And of course, a bunch of white men couldn't handle that and decided, well, you're all going to die and it's going to be ours now. This story is shocking. The places that they go in terms of these murders, how they did it, all of these pieces are also threaded together in this story, and how Graham pulls back the layers. It's told more in parts. A lot of like the actual acts and stuff like that, especially with the Osage tribes, is front-loaded at the beginning of the book. You get to understand where Mollie Burkhart, her story comes from, her family, her situation, and we get invested in her. Then we get a lot of the process of White, who was the man sent by J. Edgar Hoover out there, Tom White, a former Texas Ranger, to investigate this, and he went through all the legal aspects and the criminology. And at the end, journalists really pulling up a bunch of rocks and revealing all the horrors that were going on besides these very specific cases. And each of these parts fuel into each other to create a well-rounded and complex narrative around these murders. We get to see how the FBI was brought into existence and processed through these complicated cases. And then one thing that probably could have spent a little bit more time on was the Osage tribe and their history, but it was more geared towards and focused on the individual. And that's why we spend so much time with Mollie, who's someone we can get behind. We can get behind White too. And this particular story balances all these different aspects in an effective way. This has shocking moments. It has thrilling moments. It's so well written. The interactions between these characters are fascinating and complex, and are challenging in a way that it's like I don't know exactly how to process balancing each of these things going on. It's one of those kinds of stories that is deep, rich, and full of detail. This is very dense for not being that long of a book, because this particular book's around 350 pages, but it's fascinating in what it's able to do and how it puts a spotlight on this horrific point in American history that nobody seems to pay attention to, and now it's getting the perspective it needs. It's getting that spotlight. It's a native story. It is a story about like righteousness coming up and actually succeeding in law enforcement, and just this overall conspiracy with all these twists and turns. And it's a fascinating read or listen depending how you're taking on this book, but overall 100% would recommend, and try to recommend seeing this before you see the film. And this is a very non-fiction-y kind of way of portraying it. It'll be interesting to see what Scorsese does. But those are my thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage murders, and the birth of the FBI. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some books. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.